Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Welcome to What She Said, the heartbeat of Canadian women's voices, with me, your host, Candace Sampson. Here, we dive deep into the raw, unfiltered stories and triumphs of women from coast to coast. This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement where empowerment and education collide and where mansplaining is shown the door. We're here to celebrate, uplift, and echo you. So get cozy, tune in, and let's embark on this journey together, exploring the rich tapestry of women's lives, their battles and victories, right here on What She Said. Elder abuse is a growing scourge that sadly is not receiving the attention it deserves. While the media and society at large often shines a spotlight on child abuse, animal abuse, and spousal abuse, elder abuse often remains in the shadows, plagued by ageism and a lack of attention. The reality is heartbreaking. From scams and financial abuse by family members to loneliness attracting predators and physical abuse, the situation is dire. This moment calls for action and empathy. If you can't find it in your heart to care for those suffering the many forms of abuse I just mentioned, consider taking an interest for yourself, because this problem isn't going anywhere, and you, my friend, aren't getting any younger. Thankfully, CNPEA, the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, is working tirelessly to educate seniors and those who love them about the many ways abuse can present itself and how to protect themselves. So, without further ado, meet Benedicte Schoepflin, Executive Director of CNPEA. Benedicte, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Could you start by explaining what elder abuse encompasses and the different forms it can take?
Yeah. So it's a very complex issue that has many, many facets. So when we talk about the official definition, the World Health Organization defines it as a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action that is occurring in a relationship where there's an expectation of trust, and that's important, which causes harm or distress to an older person. So the expectation of trust content or focus is really important. Very often there's going to be an imbalance of control in a relationship. And to specify when we mean older person, usually it's around 60, sometimes 65. It can vary. And so we're talking here about not just physical violence, but we're talking about any form of intimidation, coercion, threats, tricks, anything that basically is going to lead someone to do something they don't want to do or would otherwise not want to do. And so that can be in a physical form, in an emotional abuse form, sexual abuse, financial abuse, which you probably hear the most about in the news. We also consider violation of rights and freedoms to be a form of abuse. So here you're talking about things like interfering with spiritual practices, withholding mail, preventing someone from getting visitors, things like this. Neglect, which is the failure to provide the necessities of life, and systemic abuse, also known as institutional abuse. So here we're talking about rules, regulations, policies that can harm or discriminate against older people. Sometimes they might have a neutral purpose, but they still harm the person nonetheless. So you're talking about a very wide array of situations, and many of them that can sometimes fall in very subtle gray zones. And that's what makes it really hard sometimes to pinpoint.
Yeah, that is a really broad explanation. And I think a lot of people, when they hear the term elder abuse, they do naturally lean towards physical
Correct.
abuse. But it is so much broader than that. So in your experience, what are some common signs or indicators of elder abuse that friends and family should be aware of?
Yes. And that's actually, I'm so glad that you asked this question, because In about 81% of the reports, it is either a spouse, a family member, a friend, or an acquaintance that is causing the harm. So if you are someone who is in a circle of care for an older person, whatever degree that might be, you have a key role because you are in a prime position to notice that something is happening, right? You are so close to the situation. The abuser is likely within the similar circle of care and trust. And so you need to look for changes in behavior. So that can be watching an older person suddenly become more depressed or withdrawn or agitated or fearful. Of course, people sometimes become agitated or fearful for other reasons. That doesn't mean 100%, that there's abuse, but it is usually a telltale sign. It can be changes in hygiene and presentation and the cleanliness of their home. It can be changes in social activity. So they're missing regular social events, they're missing family gatherings, and there are no clear reasons why. Another big sign is changes in living arrangements, where usually either a family member or a new friend that no one really knows suddenly moves in. And here, we have the cliche, which is a cliche for a reason, of usually the son or the grandson, that's moved into the basement. They don't necessarily have a job. They might be struggling on several levels in life, and it's supposed to be a temporary arrangement, but then they stay and things start seeming a little off. Of course, if we're talking physical abuse, injuries that are either unexplained or the explanation doesn't quite sound right and doesn't fit the injury. And in terms of financial abuse, unexplained disappearance of belongings, jewelry, clothes, the depletion of a bank account, something like that.
When it comes to cases of abuse with children, I can understand why children may not speak up or speak out. And I'm curious, are those the same reasons why elderly people may not speak up or out?
Sometimes. I think, especially when there is a family element to it, if somebody from your family is hurting you, I think many people have a certain reluctance to come forward and talk about it because they don't want to create trouble for someone that they love, right? You can be harmed by someone and still care for them, and you don't want to create issues for them. You don't want to split the family. There's a certain level of stigma and shame that's attached to abuse in general on the victim side, which really shouldn't be, but they feel shame about it. They fear what people might think, that they might think that maybe they abuse their own children and it's the karma, the return of lots of people can have some terrible takes, and that's a big one. And then I think also in some cases they fear that speaking up might change everything about their lives, right? It might change their living arrangement, their ability to live independently. It might lead some people to question their cognitive abilities and to think that maybe they're not quite with it, quote unquote, anymore. So I think all these fears kind of rolled together, crystallize, and people start thinking it's better to just not say anything. And then there's also a factor of not knowing who to turn to, right? Because you might think something is wrong and you're not okay with it, but you don't want to bring the police in, and people don't know where to go seek that advice or that support. I think we've done wonderful public education progress when it comes to abuse of children, when it comes to gender-based violence. We're not there yet with elder abuse, and so lots of people find themselves in situations where they don't know what to do.
I think some people might be listening to this and thinking this has got to be such a small problem, but that's just not true. So could you share some recent statistics on the prevalence of elder abuse in Canada? Yeah,
it is. I think that's where, anytime I talk about elder abuse, that's where you can see people's brains kind of clicking into place, because like you said, people think it only affects a tiny portion of the population, and that's not true. The latest study from 2022 estimated that about 1 in 10 older Canadians experience some form of mistreatment each year. And we know that that is a low estimate because lots of people do not come forward and do not report. It's very often called the invisible crime because of how low the reporting rate is. So the low end, 1 in 10. And so if we stick to 1 in 10 as our core stat, then that's about over 950,000 people, older people each year, that are living in harmful, unsafe situations. And like you said, our aging population is growing. So if we don't do something to kind of interrupt that cycle and put more effort of prevention, we're going to have much larger numbers simply by virtue of our demographic changes.
Well, that was actually my next question. Has this trend been, increasing over the years? Have you been watching that increase over the last, say, decade?
Yeah, there's been, I think, and there's almost I'm not going to call it a positive side, but there's almost the other side of the coin where you think if reports are increasing, it could also be because people are starting to feel more comfortable coming forward and they're starting to figure out where to go. So there's this to consider when we talk about increasing report rates. But overall, I would say, especially in the past 4 years, like other forms of family violence, gender-based violence, elder abuse increased during the pandemic. There were some staggering numbers. I think the one that speaks the most is the Senior Safety Line in Ontario saw a 250% increase in calls in the depth of the pandemic. That's a lot. That's a number that is hard to wrap your mind around, right? And that's because mostly people were, trapped at home with their abuser during a time of turmoil, of economic struggle, which also tends to influence instances of abuse and violence. So we've definitely watched the numbers grow over the pandemic. And as I mentioned, population trends, right? The 65 and up age group is the fastest growing age group in Canada today. And I think according to a study whose name I forget right now, over the next 20 years, Canada's aging population as a whole is expected to grow by 68%. So that's a lot of people.
Yeah, it really is. And every year in June, there is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day.
That's right.
And in 2023, there was a spotlight on gender-based violence. So can you elaborate on how gender plays a role in elder abuse? Is this just a continuation of an abusive relationship, or is this something that begins for many people at this stage?
It can be both. I think right off the bat, I'll say basically, if you are a woman, you are at a higher risk of experiencing mistreatment in later life, which is a sad reality. And that's because there are cases of abuse that are just growing old with the couple or with the family, and then others that manifest suddenly later in life. So we know that women they experience high rates of gender-based violence, usually at the hands of the men in their lives. And that applies to older women too. Even if we gloss over it, even if we don't talk about it as often, even if sometimes we omit them entirely from statistics and research, that is a fact. Every 6 days, a woman in Canada is killed by their intimate partner. And again, older women are represented in those statistics, even if we don't talk about them. So right there already, by virtue of the rates of gender-based violence that afflict us and affect us at every stage in our lives, you have a pretty high risk. And then you also have to consider that women grow older than men. They live longer. They outlive their partner if they're in a straight relationship pretty often. And that leaves them vulnerable to various forms of exploitation, of abuse and violence. Also, women, and I'm sorry, it's really not uplifting, but women are both a significant portion of caregivers to people living with dementia and a significant portion of people living with dementia. So they're kind of on both sides of that, the double-edged sword when it comes to the changing dynamics in a relationship when caregiving and dementia are involved. So that means that women, they have an increased vulnerability. All these factors might lead to them being more socially isolated, more marginalized, because there's that double whammy of sexism and ageism that makes them feel invisible. And that can have really devastating consequences all the way to potential femicide.
It's so disheartening. It's not that I thought that this would ever go away for women, but you always kind of hope we'd catch a break at some point, don't you? And it just seems like it never ends.
No.
It's just breaks my heart listening to this. Let's move on to financial exploitation a little bit. What are some typical scenarios of financial abuse among the elderly? And I think a lot of us automatically go to those phone calls, but that's not always the case, right?
They're a pretty significant issue, but I would say for me, frauds, and not just for me actually, for CNPEA and for many people that kind of think about all these issues, frauds and scams are a bit apart, right? There's financial abuse by somebody you know and trust. And then there's frauds and scams usually perpetuated by strangers. And I think these are two very valid issues, but slightly different in what they involve. So if you read the news, I think the most common form of abuse you're going to hear about is financial abuse. And in those financial abuse scenarios, I would say undue influence and the misuse of a power of attorney is probably the most common manifestation. And then you have on top of that the frauds and scams, whether it's on the phone or on your computer or on your tablets, whichever way they evolve as technology evolves. And that can be, you probably heard of those, the grandparent scam, the sweetheart scam, so dating scams, because a growing number of people are online looking for partners later in life. So I don't want to get too technical, but just to give people a general idea, a power of attorney, we're talking about a legal document that can be used to give one or more people the ability to make decision on your behalf for money and property if you lose the ability to do this yourself. And in Ontario, you also have POAs that cover health and personal care on a separate note. So, the one key thing to try to prevent or limit any risk of financial abuse and misuse of power of attorney is to really look into the ins and outs of a power of attorney, right? And do that with the people that you are considering giving your POA to. And so everybody must ensure that they understand the rules, they understand the responsibilities, they understand your wishes, so that everybody's on the same page. That's a big one. And then revisit that regularly, make changes if you feel like it when possible, as long as they're based on a very thorough reflection. Because one of the signs of potential financial abuse is a sudden change to legal documents, right? A sudden change of power of attorney, a sudden addition to somebody to a joint bank account, or a change to a living trust. So that line, again, is fine. And it's a matter of, who made the decision? How fast was it made? Do you know this person? Do you trust this person? Do you have a track record with this person? And I'll say as well, there is now recently the introduction of a system called the trusted contact person. And so that person, they're not permitted to make decisions on your behalf, but they're here as a form of emergency contact. So let's say you have a financial advisor, and your financial advisor maybe has some concerns about their older clients. They think that person either might show sign of being exploited, or maybe they have a sense that their mental capacity is changing. They can contact that trusted contact person, get in touch with them, to kind of look into it and have a conversation with the client and have that extra person, that extra pair of eyes on the situation. So in all cases, power of attorney, trusted contact person, you need to choose people in your life that you trust thoroughly, that understand your vision and your wishes for your life as you age, that you communicate with on a regular basis, and who will be comfortable speaking with professionals and sometimes advocating for you about your personal situation, because it can be a big responsibility, right? So it's best to have different people in these roles, right? A different person for your POA for finance, a POA for health, and trusted contact person, because that adds that second, third layer of protection to your affairs and to yourself.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month slows. Full terms at mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
And on the other side of things where, it's more of these con artists and scam artists, are there efforts being made to provide more education to seniors in this regards? I mean, we both know technology just moves so fast. It's impossible to keep up. So I don't think we can blame them.
Oh no,
How do we help them?
It's hard. It's really hard because you do not want to raise awareness to the point that people feel scared about using the technology that can be so useful and that can be such a connecting tool, right? But it's a matter of explaining not all technology is bad. You just need to understand some key factors. And not every phone call is bad, but you need to recognize some patterns as potential scams. And that's the hard part. So I would say one thing I always tell people is that it doesn't matter what the platform is. It doesn't matter if it's a rotary phone or if it's a smartphone or if it's a laptop. It doesn't matter what the scenario is. If you truly pay attention, they always work on the same patterns. So there's always, they're trying to rush you, right? So there's a time-sensitive element. So it's either you've won something, but you can only redeem your prize if you respond today, or there's an emergency and you need to make this fast decision because something bad is in the balance otherwise. There's this sort of emotional bludgeoning, right? They're hitting you where it hurts. So it might be because they're impersonating somebody that you think you like and that you think you are dating, and they're making you worried, telling you they're sick and they need help, and or it's about pretending to be your grandchild and saying, I'm in Thailand, I'm in jail, don't tell mom and dad, please send me money, things like this. So they're trying to really get you through your feelings and to push you into making an immediate decision without thinking too hard. And they will not, they will include a level of threat that's either veiled or very clear about what happens if you don't do that. When you have those three things, the time-sensitive, rushed decision, the emotional blackmail, and then the threat, it doesn't matter what the story is. It doesn't matter even if it is so believable. You have something there that is rotten, and you need to just hang up, shut it down, just not go any further. But yeah, the education efforts around that are, I think, increasing. Like, I know I've done a whole lot of presentations on the topic. CNPEA has done a bunch of webinars. March is Fraud Prevention Month. We're actually hosting 2 separate webinars with an organization called Connected Canadians about phishing scams and how to stay safe and what to do if you've been hit. And I think, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre is also every year doing a big push of communication around the issue. So, the stories will change, the platforms will change, but the key tactics remain the same. What's really hard, I think, for people is that that mix of technology being something that they don't necessarily always feel comfortable with, that they're a little scared of. And so if somebody starts using complicated technical terms at them, they immediately think something's wrong. And then we've also heard people say, I come from a generation where I was told to not make a fuss. And there again is a gender layer to that, because especially women, right? They were told, don't make a fuss, don't make a scene, be a good girl, be discreet, all these things. And so they are not equipped sometimes to stand up for themselves and say no. And so I always tell them, I'm like, just say no. And it's like, it's good for you. It's a personal way of keeping safe, and you're not going to hurt the scammer's feelings. It does. And if you're wrong, if it so happens that you said no and you were wrong, that's okay. You can fix that later. But it's really about changing a mentality, and it's about kind of equipping people with that knowledge so that they can recognize those red flags.
Yeah. And, I can't help but think with, the rise of AI and deep fakes, we are all in so much trouble.
We are.
Forward. But those 4 elements you mentioned, I think, are important. And I don't think they will change with AI.
That's correct. And I would like to add, because I think sometimes people think in a very ageist fashion that those scams only target older people because older people are hapless with technology and with the modern world. That is a very unfair statement, because they might be targeted more specifically by certain types of scams by virtue of being older. But when you look at the numbers of who's getting hit and who's, having losses, people from younger generations are also up there. Like what we refer to as, millennials and Gen Zs are not immune. So I think they fall for it. I think maybe the triggers are slightly different. They fall for things slightly differently because they're used to putting everything online, which means their entire life and details about their lives are available to just about anyone. So it's not like it's strictly a us versus them, young versus old problem. This is truly something that we should all be keeping an eye on. And the AI matters, I would like to say, is the next frontier, but we're already kind of in it. We just don't realize it yet. And that's, I think, going to be something big for all of us to learn how to tackle and how to educate people about.
Oh, absolutely. My parents, my dad is 77 and he's one of the most technologically tuned in seniors I know. He jokes that he has the thumbs of a 16-year-old when it comes to texting with his emojis and everything. He cracks me up. But, between my daughters who are Gen Z and my parents who are boomers, obviously, and I'm Gen X, we all we've established this sort of safe word between all of us that only we know. Nobody has it on their phone. It's all in their brain, and we just we rely on that for instances of what we're seeing with these deep fakes with calls of I've been kidnapped or I need money and because anybody can take your voice at this point and turn it into a recording.
Yep, that is a very great idea, and that's actually, let's add that to the list of recommendations for people. Having a safe word, a code, a password that you share with your family and close friends. And like you said, it's not written anywhere. It's not saved anywhere. It's in your brain, and it's only to be used for situations like this, I think is very, very useful.
Are there certain elders that are more susceptible to abuse than others? I mean, what comes to my mind are people who are suffering from dementia. That really is a concern, I think, for many people, especially for people who have family members in perhaps long-term care facilities because they can't care for them at home anymore.
Yeah.
And they may not be able to even tell you about it.
That's right. So it's that, I guess I'll start with one kind of blanket statement. Elder abuse does not really discriminate, and it can affect anyone, right? Regardless of your socioeconomic standing, your culture, your marital status, you name it, you could experience elder abuse. But that's not because, the moment you turn 60, you suddenly flip a switch and become vulnerable. That's not it. You are who you are. But certain life experiences, certain social determinants can sort of increase your vulnerabilities and become risk factors, right? We all have layers to our identities. And so sometimes you find yourself at the intersection of that perfect storm of discrimination and injustices and health issues, etc., that increase your vulnerability to being targeted or victimized. And so in the 2022 study I was mentioning earlier that came out not that long ago, some of the key factors that were identified as really risk factors for elder abuse were if you have experienced mistreatment as a child or a youth. So there is a pattern of abuse and victimization that repeats itself across the life course. If you're experiencing physical, cognitive, mental health issues and you're sharing your living arrangements, that just adds that extra layer here. If you identify as Black, and if you live with someone who is financially dependent on you. So these are clearly identified risk factors for elder abuse. Being a woman is another one. So, and like you said, the cognitive challenges of any type can be, can create that additional difficulty for people to sometimes even realize what is happening to them and then communicate about it.
Hi, I'm Steve Yerko.
And I'm Tara Sands. Now available from Maji Media is our new podcast, 4Kids Flashback. 4Kids is the company who brought you the English dub of Pokemon in the late 90s and so many other shows like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Shaman King, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Kirby, the infamous One Piece dub, and so many more.
We'll be talking to the people who worked at 4Kids. Actors, directors, writers, editors, producers, engineers, you get the point. And hopefully get the answers to questions both you and I have about the company.
I actually worked there as a voice actor on some of the shows.
And I was a kid watching the shows and remember way more than Tara does.
And thank God for that. Steve is actually a professional storyboard artist, which gives some really unique insights into anime and animation. Subscribe today wherever you get your podcasts. That's the number 4 Kids Flashback.
I may regret asking this next question because I break down really easily at these stories, but you must see some really heartbreaking cases of elder abuse. Is there a case that particularly moved you or changed the way you approach your work?
It's hard. I was thinking about that one because, CNPEA does not provide direct, frontline services. So we don't encounter scenarios directly, but we do often hear about them. And sometimes people email us to say, this is my situation. What do I do? So I'd say I'm also a big softie. And so all of these stories have an impact on me. Every case is heartbreaking because you are looking at, there's such a profound impact, not just on one person, but also on their families, on their communities. It has this ripple effect. Like it just kind of just rips through the whole community. As it's not just staying in a vacuum. It harms a lot of people along the way. And so when it's taking place in families, especially, you get those messages from people where the siblings and the children, the grandchildren are tearing themselves apart, and the ones that are trying to do good are feeling very lonely and very helpless. And there is not a single story that is exactly the same, but the impact is always tremendous on everyone. I personally also feel for people who've been victimized by scammers because of how much shame they carry, because they feel like they were gullible. There is 2 stories that stayed with me, one from the media and one from a person I work with. The one in the media was about a lady who got scammed, and it was a long con, right? They call, they establish a relationship. I guess I should have mentioned that as well, that can be another form of scam where they, instead of trying to scare you into doing something, they try to woo you into doing something. And so that scammer established a relationship to the point that they were calling that lady every week, and they were the only point of contact this woman had, right? She could go weeks without talking to anyone. And suddenly this person calls them every week and asks them question and asks them, did you take your pills today? What did you watch on
makes
TV?
You vulnerable.
Loneliness makes you vulnerable. Exactly. And at the end of it, this person, not only did she lose money, she also lost her sense of trust. She lost someone that she thought cared about her earnestly. Mm-hmm. And she started completely questioning everything about her decision making, right? Everything about her instincts. It's heartbreaking to think that you get to 75 and suddenly your entire world crumbles down to your own self-perception. And then I'm getting worked up.
You're getting me too. We may need to take a break here.
But yeah,
Okay, let's talk the other one.
The other one was even more striking to me, and that's actually opened the door to kind of like a new aspect of work that we've kind of a new direction for work that we've been going into for the past couple of years. So this is a person who again got scammed, and they lost everything to that long scam. And it landed them in a shelter for older adults. Like they lost everything, including their house, right? And then they had to explain to the person who was doing the intake how they got there. And so kind of talking with this person who works in a shelter, sort of opened up this bigger conversation about, how many shelters are there out there for people, older people, whether they are fleeing a situation of violence, have lost their house because of the scam or something else. And that's when we realized for all of Canada, there's 14 places that are either shelters, transition housing, sometimes even just it's a one apartment that people can have for no more than a week or a month. 14 of these places all across the country, specifically responding to the needs of older adults. And they're not even evenly distributed, right? So you're going to have 5 in BC and then none in Saskatchewan, for instance. And so that sort of opened this new door of wanting to work more closely on the topic of safe spaces for older adults. And we're in the midst of it right now. But so
that's actually something I hadn't even thought about are those safe spaces for seniors.
Mm-hmm.
That is devastating. We need to be doing so much better to be protecting our seniors. Let's talk about CNPEA then, because you guys are really doing great work. So can you describe the organization's primary goals and initiatives in combating elder abuse?
Correct. Yes. So CNPEA, the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, we've been around for over 20 years, and we are the only national organization that is entirely focused on elder abuse prevention and neglect prevention. And we've added ageism to the list of things that we work on, because ageism, I would say, is basically the most extreme form of elder abuse, right? It plays such a big role in how much we notice and do or don't do to prevent elder abuse. And so our mission really, it's focused on awareness raising, public education, and policy work. So we're working with government, working with partners across the country to try to foster a more coordinated approach to elder abuse prevention and response. And that's something that, we've been doing for a while, but 2 years ago, we put out a national engagement strategy. It's called Future Us. And we've set 3 big goals for ourselves and for Canada, which is, first one, prioritize elder abuse prevention in every community. Second goal, support and develop more elder abuse prevention networks at the local level, at the provincial and territorial level, because they're not in every part of the country, and they play such an important role when it comes to public education and system navigation and being there to answer people's questions. And the third goal is to teach everyone, regardless of status or age or where you are in the system, teach everyone to recognize the signs, respond efficiently, and refer to the right services. So we're on this national public engagement mission, and we're rallying more people to our cause as we keep working. We're educating them, we're supporting them in taking concrete actions. And that's something that I think people need to hear, because after everything we've discussed, it can feel really overwhelming and really depressing. What I need people to hear and understand is that elder abuse, it's not an individual issue, it's a systemic issue. But it can be, a systemic issue can be tackled through like a collective impact approach, right? So that means everybody where they are in the system contributing. And if they're equipped with the right knowledge to advocate for themselves, to advocate for each other, if they take action at their own level, the more they do that, the more chance we have of efficiently tackling the issue as a country. There is a lot of power in a group of citizens, organizations banding together and, pestering their elected politicians and asking that things be made a priority. There is a lot of power there. This is how a lot of great changes have been made in the past and can be done again when it comes to elder abuse prevention.
You are based on the west coast of Canada, correct?
That's right.
What challenges do you face trying to address this nationally? Do you have offices in other provinces as well, or is that something down the line that you're looking at?
That would be nice. It's kind of an interesting thing because we are, I guess, long before everybody had to move online because of COVID, we were a fully virtual pan-Canadian organization, which means that, my office here is in Vancouver, but our board members, our volunteers, our members are all over the country. And so we try to have a membership, and especially on the board level, that is representative of the country, both in terms of geography and sectors and age groups. So we are kind of positioned everywhere. And by virtue of being the Canadian network, we also have these relationships that kind of flow back and forth with all the existing provincial and territorial networks. There are currently 6. And we're trying to grow more. So that sort of gives us a very nice direct kind of foothold and ear to the ground in all these parts of the country. But, ideally, with the right support from the federal government, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we could actually expand.
We will tag them in this podcast.
And actually, have an outpost or an office in Toronto or Ottawa or other parts of the country as well.
You sort of touched a little bit about, sort of this 3-pronged approach you have, and public education is a big one. What role does public education and awareness play in preventing elder abuse, and how can individuals get involved?
Well, I'd say public education awareness is a huge factor. I would consider that the most important thing right now, because I think, like we discussed at the top of the episode, there are lots of people who have either misconceptions about what elder abuse is and where it manifests, or who think, oh, that's not in my family, not in my community. And I think kind of opening eyes and equipping people with the right tools is really, really important. So again, I'll point to Future Us, our strategy. You can find it at futureus.cnpea.ca, because what we've decided to do is that we decided to outline recommended action and break it down for people at every level, right? So what can you do as an individual? What can you do as a company or an organization? You're in research and academia. What can you do to help collect data, and what do we need to know about? You're in government. Here is what you could do. And the whole point of this is to try to empower people to take action. So I'll give some examples. On an individual level, start small. Don't overwhelm yourself. This starts with figure out what services are in your area. Is there a prevention network in your province? For instance, in Ontario, there is. It's called Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. Contact them. See if they offer a workshop to learn about, the signs and how to respond and refer. Take that workshop. Maybe become a member of that organization. See if you can become somebody who is trained to become a person who hosts more trainings and workshops around in your community to start community dialogues around it. Reach out, and I will never stop repeating it, reach out to your local elected officials and ask them what they are doing about it. Because one thing about being part of the most significant demographic age group, as currently known as baby boomers, that, they've, by virtue of being such a large group, they've always changed things, right? When they were born, we had to build more nurseries and schools to make sure there was room for every baby. When they rebelled in their 20s, we had this late 60s, early 70s, big social upheavals. Every step of the way, by virtue of being a large group, they've changed things. There's another potential there. And I'll add, it's not up to just the older person in the room to do the work. It's up for all of us, because we're all aging. I mean, the options are you're either aging or you're dead. So if you're going to stay alive and age, you have a vested interest of making sure that your experience of aging and your loved one's experience of aging are going to be good. But you have a voting power. You have a volume that should matter to your elected officials. So go and bug them. ask them what they are doing. If they don't know about it, put it on their radar, talk about it. And if you run a company or an organization, I'd say, ask yourself, are you an age-friendly workplace? Is anti-ageism part of your diversity, equity, and inclusion policies? Could you maybe offer professional development around ageism, around elder abuse prevention? We've seen a growing number of companies are training their staff about gender-based violence in the workplace, how to recognize it, how to act safely. Why not do that about elder abuse prevention? Because our workforce is also, you have people of every age in the workforce, and likely people who are going to keep working in their later years. So what are you doing to make sure that this is a positive experience and that you can contribute to a more age-inclusive society? So those are examples. There are plenty more. I will let you discover them for yourself. But I think there's a lot to be done.
As I'm sitting here listening to you too, I can't help but think about, boomers. There tends to be this vilification of boomers as this evil group who somehow ruined the world and ruined the environment and took all the housing and did all this. And as you said, things changed as they moved through society. It's, they're not all this evil group changing the world. And it worries me a little bit because in social media, we see this sort of coldness towards them as a group, which only further cements this opinion of them, as we don't really need them. I hate that us and them mentality that has come into this. It's dangerous, I think, and only sort of heightens this risk of abuse that they may be susceptible to.
Yeah. And that's ageism in a nutshell for you. And I'll add, ageism is not just towards older people, right? It can fly every which way. It's really about how you think, feel, and act about somebody based on their age and solely their age, right? It's a form of discrimination. So we've managed to, I'm not going to say eradicate, that would be overly positive, but we've managed to fight against and counter and make unacceptable other isms. And I think now we're at that point where it's time to look at ageism, because while we spend our time, and it's especially, I think, noticeable on social media, we spend our time throwing hashtags at each other about age-related cliches and, what makes you a good or a bad, like Gen Z in the workplace, boomers and the environment and all these things. While we're busy fighting over this, we're not really dealing with the bigger structural issues that actually affect us all. Things like housing, safety, like a basic minimum wage that people can actually live on. All these things affect us at every age. They might affect us differently. There might have been different, life circumstances for some age groups, but nonetheless, we're all kind of, bathing in the same messy world right now. We're on a burning planet. And there's a time for pointing fingers and there's a time for taking action. And I think we have more to gain by doing it together across age groups, because we're experiencing the same thing. The social isolation that people have been suffering from, the mental health crisis that we're going through, it affects younger people, it affects older people, it affects all of us. So I think there's great potential there in kind of overcoming those, that ism and those deeply, deeply seated ageist thoughts. Some of them even are self-inflicted, if you think about it. How we think about our own aging, how the media talks about aging, it's all very bad right now. But if you start kind of reflection around that, I think that's when you start realizing there's more, people have more in common than they realize across age groups. And that can be very powerful as well.
Absolutely. And that's the most frustrating thing to me, is that we do have more in common than we think. For people who are listening to this and who want to help or may need assistance, what resources does CNPEA offer and how can they reach out?
All right. So first thing first, they'll go to cnpea.ca. That is our website. And it's basically a hub for information. We've tried to build a platform that is easy to use, that gathers data, information, tools, not spreadsheets, infographics, in one place, because it's really easy to fall down the rabbit hole when you're looking for information. And particularly if you're looking for help in your area, at the top right corner of our screen, you'll see a button that says Find Help. And there you will find a list of support services and resources that are organized by province and territory. So we keep that list updated on a regular basis. It is, if you are in Ontario or in Saskatchewan, your services are different. We've gathered them in a simple list. So start with that. If you are in a province that has or a territory that has a elder abuse prevention network, get in touch with them directly. They're wonderful people. They will provide additional local help that you can, or point you in the right directions that you can kind of start on your journey, whatever it might be. It might be just that you're collecting information for your own sake, or it might be that you're trying to help someone and that you're looking for the next step. As I said, we don't provide directly frontline services, but if you get in touch by email with me, I will make sure to point you in the right direction as well.
What about social media channels, just to sort of keep you top of mind? Do you have ones that you would like to push people to?
Yes. We're on LinkedIn for the serious professionals. We are on Facebook, and we are as well on X, otherwise known as Twitter. You can find us there under @CNPEA, and we share regular information, whether it is, upcoming webinars on a topic like the Fraud Prevention Month webinars, or it can be about World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, what's coming up. We usually do a big campaign in June and have a big event live online that is accessible to everyone, as well as any form of new development, either announcement of maybe, either funding or governmental decisions, or, a law reform somewhere that is meaningful and that can point the way for others. So it's kind of a good place to come if you want to get the Cliff Notes.
All right, excellent. And we're old enough to remember what Cliff Notes are.
That's right.
My kids would have no idea what a Cliff Note is. Anyway, Benedicte, you've been a wealth of information. I can't thank you enough for joining me and sharing all this. This is fantastic. And I know people are going to get a lot out of this episode. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
If today's podcast resonated with you, spread the word and share the inspiration. Don't forget to hit subscribe on What She Said across your favorite podcast platforms. Crave more? Join my vibrant community by signing up for my newsletter at whatshesaidtalk.com, and let's get social on Facebook, Instagram, and X at What She Said Talk. Dive into my world a little deeper on TikTok and Threads at Candace Said. And for those who love the airwaves, catch me weekly on 105.9 The Region, Blast the Radio, and 107.7 Pulse FM. Until next time, keep making waves, and remember, your voice matters.
It is your favorite girl. That's right, it's the Allie Mars, the one and the only. Everyone else just ain't me. I am the host of Welcome to Mars, a lifestyle podcast where nothing is off the table. I have come a long way from sex and dating and have transformed the new vibe to all things lifestyle. We still talk sex, but I'm more interested in the journey, where people have come from, how they made it, and where they're going. Subscribe or follow to a brand new look and a brand new era. Welcome to Mars.
Subscribe or follow on Apple, Spotify, Google, or at thealliemars.com.
Because even with the new look, I'm still that same bitch you love to hate.
What happens when we play outside? We become healthier, both mentally and physically. We become more creative and more focused. We connect with nature, each other, and ourselves. Let's Take This Outside, a new podcast hosted by me, Marianne Iveson, an aspiring outdoor athlete and nature lover. I speak to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about their connection to nature, how it affects their performance, and everyday life. Let's Take This Outside, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, and at letstakethisoutside.ca.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.